Most wedding ceremonies begin with a sense of optimism over a joyous occasion. The wedding ceremony, it's a happy one where friends and family celebrate the event. Expectations are high, and certainly few newlyweds are planning on how their marriage will end. But good intentions are often not enough. Personality conflicts, relatives, jobs, children, money, and other factors put stress on a marriage. Sometimes expectations of each other are simply too high. As a result, every 13 seconds someone is getting divorced. Such is the reality of our times. If divorce is a fact of life, then why do we cope with it so badly? Why not come up with some means, possibly even some ceremony that would make divorce less painful? Recently, I had the opportunity to talk with two co-authors who are divorced from each other. They've written a book to help others stave off the agony that makes life hell for many couples in the throes of divorce. And here's that interview that I share with you now. Hi, welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice, and my guests today, two guests actually, Phil and Barbara Penningroth, and they have a book called Healing Divorce. First, we're going to hear from Phil. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Leslie. Nice to be here.
Now, this is an unusual topic we haven't talked about before. Divorce usually ends in turmoil, conflict, unhappiness all around, hurt and pain. You believe it can be otherwise?
Yes, we do. That is indeed your description of the way divorce usually ends is quite accurate. But I think, and we think, that the culture actually encourages that kind of bitterness and conflict. We live in the United States. We live in an adversarial legal culture where one person has to win and the other person has to lose. And we also live I think we all live in a tabloid culture that encourages a lot of what we describe in the book as Schadenfreude, the pleasure, taking pleasure in the pain of others. And I think every tabloid that's talked about Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise is kind of feeding on that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but
that's kind of tragic.
We found personally, and also in the research for the book, that using ceremony as an end for divorce can be extremely healing and bring forgiveness and peace to the end of a relationship.
Now, this book is written by yourself and your wife.
Former wife, right?
Former wife,
Mm-hmm.
And you went through a divorce yourself. What
Mm-hmm.
brought about that divorce?
Well, it's hard to put that. I've been asked that question many times, and it's always a difficult one to answer because the inside of a marriage is a mystery to anyone outside the marriage, and so to try and put it into a concise phrase, I can't do it. All I can say is that there came a point where we felt we were not meeting, or I was the one. I take responsibility for this. I was the one who left the relationship, and I felt we were not meeting, and I decided that it was time for me to leave.
Wow, and afterwards, this book, this very positive creation, could come from it. How many people get divorced? Was there something in your book about every 12 seconds or something?
Yeah,
like that?
it's. I mean, it depends on which expert you talk to, but it's no less than 40%, and it's probably closer to 50% of all people who get married end up divorcing.
And you're not necessarily saying that this is, this great tragedy of society, except for the fact that we haven't come up with a really good way of dealing with it. It's a reality.
I think divorce is always, in some sense, is always tragic. I'm the child of divorced parents myself. It was not a happy experience. And I think divorce is always painful and always difficult for the people involved in it, for their children, and for their families. But it doesn't have to be destructive. And I think that's the thing we're focusing on. It is a life transition that is not honored in this culture in any way, shape, or form. In fact, if anything, it's kind of shunted to the side. And we believe that, and have found personally, and the people who tell their stories in our book have found that using ritual and ceremony to end the relationship can bring, again, a lot of healing and forgiveness and closure and peace.
So there are better ways of dealing with it. Doesn't the legal profession get in there, though, and make it a very adversarial thing?
Absolutely. I mean, the legal profession One of the things I like to say is that there are two great industries founded on the kind of conflicts involved in this. One is the legal profession, and the other is country and Western music, where someone always had to do someone.
D-I-V-O-R-C-E.
Yeah, someone always had to do someone wrong, and
Yeah.
and that's a very simplistic way of looking at relationship and looking at divorce.
So you suggest that rituals help. Now, I'm almost a person who mistrusts rituals because I think of them as things from the past, things that don't necessarily apply to my life today, handed down from medieval times. But you're talking about a new kind of ritual.
Well, we're talking about something that you first of all, it can be a number of, you can do it a number of different ways, which is we created our own ritual, our own ceremony, parting ceremony, because when we decided to do this, we could find no models for this. That's one of the reasons we wrote the book, so that other people will have some models. There are some rituals that are actually in the context of liturgical tradition. A number of churches, we discovered to our surprise after we wrote as we were writing the book, actually have divorce rituals in their liturgy, or have healing rituals that are often adapted for divorce. The symbology of a ritual is a very, very powerful kind of thing, and much more powerful than someone, for example, on our book tour said, well, just lighting a candle or blowing out a candle, that's not going to do anything. Well, that's true, and that is not going to do anything, but they miss the point that the symbology in this particular case of blowing out the one candle and lighting two candles can have a profound effect that goes way below the level of consciousness.
So it's not a surface thing. You're not just trying to put a positive spin on something bad.
Absolutely not. There's always going to be pain and sadness. It's loss. It's a loss of a relationship. It's loss of the past. It's not necessarily loss of the past because you have your memories, but it's certainly loss of the future.
Yeah. What about for people who are in a love relationship? Maybe they live together, maybe they don't, but it comes to an end.
Anytime there's an emotional commitment, this can be very helpful. I mean, one of the interesting rituals that we found, a Jewish rabbi wrote us, and he and his congregation had divorced, and the process was very, very similar psychologically to a husband and wife divorcing. There was anger, there was bitterness, there was resentment, there was pain, and they worked out a ritual that was really quite lovely. A number of the stories in the book are by people who were not actually married, but who had love relationships and ended the relationship with a ritual.
Yes. I'm wondering about sort of your background and what led up to the actual creation of a book. What's your job, your career?
I'm a freelance writer. I work for actually way back I worked in mental health for many years, and then I moved into freelance writing. I wrote a lot for television in Hollywood, and that's my general background.
Sounds like a place where you would see many people around you going through divorce.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and you hear many, many horror stories.
What did you see? What kind of horror stories?
Well, the same ones everyone hears. I mean, you just talk about divorce, and someone will talk about how their ex did X, Y, and Z, and how amazing. It's amazing how bitterness hangs on. People who have been divorced for 20 years, you start them talking about their previous relationship, and pretty soon they're talking about that bum and that terrible person, and that seems to us incredibly destructive for them personally, and also for their children and their families.
What do you really do with the bitterness and anger that any person would feel from a divorce?
Well, I think you accept that it's part of the process. That's the first thing, and you also accept that it can change. That you don't have to live with that bitterness. Barbara likes. I'll steal a quote from Barbara, but she likes to say, that bitterness is like taking poison and expecting your partner to die. It just doesn't make sense when you think about it, and it's also very corrosive, as I mentioned before, with your children and your wider family.
So there it is. You've got to get rid of that bitterness in some way or another because it's self-destructive to the person who's feeling it.
Yeah, and to your loved ones.
Sure. And your ritual will help with that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a whole process as part of the ritual, and this is not just ours, but all the rituals we found has some section on forgiveness. And it's not important that you be able to forgive, because a lot of people say, I could never forgive that person. Yes. But anybody can come to a place where you're willing to be willing to forgive. It's a subtle but very important distinction. Are you willing to try? Are you willing to make the effort to forgive the other person? And everyone can say, yeah, I'm willing to make the effort. They may choose not to, but they can actually say that.
Yeah, I don't think we've done a great job in our contemporary society with training kids about forgiveness.
Absolutely
It
not.
is a skill, isn't it?
It is a skill.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you talk about the leaver and the left.
Right.
The person in a relationship who is left behind when someone leaves, what do they feel? What's their first reaction?
Well, I think it's always shock. I
Yeah.
mean, no matter how long you've talked about, difficulties in a relationship, when one person says, well, I'm going to leave, I want a divorce, the other person is always shocked and like stunned. That can't be happening. And then there's often, this culture encourages people to move into a victim stance very, very rapidly. So all that the leavers, the person who's left, all her or his friends will be coming around and saying, well, that person, how could they do that to you? And they were never that nice in the first place, and all those kinds of things that a lot of divorcing people hear.
Yeah.
And the challenge for the person who's left is not to fall into that victim stance, not to go, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me, but to take some responsibility for their part in what was going on. Okay.
Now, he or she who leaves then is also feeling a set of emotions that aren't necessarily like freedom and positive and
Absolutely
all that
not.
great
I mean,
stuff.
I think the major thing that the person who leaves has to struggle with is to hold their ambivalence. No one, in my experience, no one leaves a relationship without feeling very ambivalent about doing that. You might get to a place where you feel a lot of anger and you kind of self-righteously stomp off, but in your heart of hearts, you feel some ambivalence. And holding that ambivalence is a very important part of working with the entire process of separation and divorce. If you don't hold that, your danger is to slip into a justification, angry justification, because people are saying, well, how come you left? How come you left? And you have to be willing to, you have to be willing to say, to take, again, own your own stuff,
Yeah.
and not put it all off on your partner. Well, I left because she or he did X, Y, or Z.
And people love to place blame. It
Absolutely.
wasn't my fault. that kind of
Absolutely,
thing.
and it's pretty typical in this culture for family and friends to want to take sides. And one of the things that a ceremony does is prevents that.
That's right. Now, when you bring kids into that picture, you have children. Of course, parents are prone to want their children to be on their personal side, not the one of the spouse. How does the ritual bring children into the divorce process?
Well, it does several things. First of all, a ritual reassures children that their parents are going to be their parents, whether they're living together or not. One of the key elements of a ritual where there are children involved in the divorce is that the parents stand up and affirm in front of witnesses that they are going to set aside their personal differences, no matter how they may feel about each other, they're going to be parents for their children. They're going to continue to be parents for their children. And a lot of parents actually symbolize this with a gift. For example, one mother we know, gave each child a gold ring, and that symbolized the undying nature of her love. And a father gave each of his children a gold chain, and each link in that chain symbolized a good time that they'd shared in the past, and also good times that they would share in the future.
Are you a religious person?
I am.
How does this ritual fit in with your religious beliefs?
Well, I tend to be. I'm Buddhist, so I don't believe that divorce is a sin. But I can speak to your question in terms of those people who do believe divorce is a sin. I think one of the things that most Christians, or many Christians, have to struggle with is the sense that they've broken a holy vow, until death do you part. And one of the things that we found that a number of churches are doing is working with that issue in a very active and creative way. I don't know if I mentioned before, but we've discovered a number of churches have actual rituals in their liturgy.
What do you wear to your divorce ceremony?
Actually, that was something that Barbara and I went back and forth about. And first we thought about wearing the original clothes we wore for our wedding. It was our original wedding was one of those neo-Renaissance, early 1970s weddings. And then I didn't want to do that, and then we had a disagreement about what to wear, and then we decided we'd been on a long time ago, we'd been to South Africa or Southern Africa, and we found this phrase there, casually elegant. So we said to each other, okay, well, we'll just choose something casually elegant. We wanted it to be pleasant and nice, but we didn't feel that we didn't want symbolism of using clothes from the wedding didn't feel quite appropriate.
Yes, Phil, thanks for joining us today. Barbara will be back right after our commercial break. Welcome back to Off the Page. My second guest today is the co-author of A Healing Divorce, and it's Barbara Penningroth, former wife of Phil and co-author of the book, of course. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
How did you cope with your divorce, with your separation and divorce?
Well, as Phil said earlier, it was a shock at the beginning. I found myself really devastated. Certainly, I don't think anybody gets married expecting to get divorced. And there's a tremendous upheaval, I think, that occurs. It certainly did for me. And then I found myself becoming pretty angry, and at the point I really began to feel pretty bitter. And then I began to feel pretty miserable about feeling pretty angry and pretty bitter. And ultimately, I began to look for, there's got to be a way to do this that gets us through this whole process in a way that for us, that we could still be friends. I really had valued the friendship, and we had a long history together. We've been married 25 years. And there was a lot in that relationship that was really good. And I think there is in most relationships. I think one of the things that happens in a divorce process is that what was good in the relationship really gets lost. And that was one of the things that I wanted to preserve. I'd been married half my life during that time, and a lot of who I was came from that relationship.
Sounds like a lot of the same emotions that a person experiences after the death of a loved one. Is there some kind of similarity?
Exactly.
The difference is
except sometimes I think yeah, sometimes it's even worse because they're right there. With death, I think there's more of a closure, and in divorce it's a little bit more difficult. Also, currently, there's not the same kind of social support for people who are going through the divorce that there might be for people who are going through the death of a loved one.
What was your background?
My background coming...
As a professional?
As a professional? I'm both a registered nurse and a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. And so for me, this was sort of living a lot of what I'd been working with.
Yes. Now, did that come as even more of a shock to you that despite the fact you'd been talking about these things with your clients for many years, when it came to you, it was different?
I don't know it was different. It was certainly more real. I would put it that way, for sure.
Yeah. Describe a really good divorce ceremony.
Really, well, you know, I'll describe our own because I think it was a really good divorce ceremony. One of the things that we started off with was an explanation to the people who were there, who were friends and family, and people we were close to, about how we'd come to this process and where we both were right then. We'd made a tribute to the relationship, which was we'd taken hundreds of photographs, the ones that are always in the garage, that you're going to get in the albums later on, and we'd taken those and gone through them, which was also a lot of part of the grieving process for us. And we'd had them made into a video that we actually showed at the wedding, at the divorce, at the ceremony. And then after that, we did a section about forgiving each other, but asking for forgiveness for ourselves and also for each other for any harm that we'd done intentionally or unintentionally during the relationship. We thanked each other for the things that we really valued in the relationship. And then the hardest part for me was letting go of the future. And what we did, each one of us made a list of the things that we would miss in this relationship, the things that weren't going to come to pass. And we took those and we wrote them on a list, we read them to each other, and then we put them in a bowl, and we actually burned them, and with the intention that the energy of those be released to give us both the courage to live the new lives that we are going to be living now separately.
Did you cry?
I cried, yes. I did cry.
Very
and
intense
I think the ceremonies are very emotional and at the same time healing. Phil talked earlier about the bitterness and anger. And bitterness and anger really closes the heart. And I think it also protects you from the grief. And if you're willing to go to the grief, there's healing through that, because your heart is much more open in that place.
I know you have a website. I'm going to ask for it now,
Yeah.
just so we don't miss it at
It's
the end. It's a place for people to go to if they just
Right.
want a little more insight into this.
It talks about the
Yeah.
book. It gives you some samples. It gives you leads to other websites that might be helpful.
www.
www.healingdivorce.com.
Okay, there it is. Good. What do you say to someone who hears your story, like you just described, your divorce ceremony, and they shake their head and they say, "For me, not in a million years. Couldn't touch it."
I would ask them some questions. I think some of the questions that we ask in the beginning of the book are really helpful. Did you ever love this person? Were some of the things that you shared in your life together wonderful and valuable to you? Do you care about your own emotional well-being? Do you care about your children's emotional well-being? Do you prefer peace over conflict? Would you like healing in this situation? I think most people, no matter how devastated they are, will answer yes to that.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, even if this isn't something you could consider doing with your partner, you can do it alone. In about 50% of cases, we think it's not possible to do with your partner because probably there's too much emotion to be able to do it successfully at that time. But you can do it alone, and it still has a very great impact on yourself, certainly your children, and your former partner. And it's never too late. We've had people who have gone back 20 years later and done a closing ritual, a closing ceremony, to bring that relationship to closure because they left it. It never did close. There were a lot of things that happened that really didn't bring healing in the situation.
Does anyone ever fully recover from a divorce?
It certainly is part of your history, from my experience. There's always regret. There's always a sense of it could have been otherwise. I mean, certainly not advocating divorce. I really believe that everybody should try everything possible before that's a decision. But when it happens, it's going to end in a ritual anyway. It's going to end in the ceremony in the courts. And you do have a choice about creating a ritual that's much more positive.
Why do you think the divorce rate is so high?
You know, I think because we expect more out of marriages than we ever have at any other time in history. Marriages are now expected, they're supposed to be your best friend. They're supposed to be the person who's your confidant. They're supposed to be economically supportive, all those things. And we've never asked this kind of emotional intimacy out of relationship in the entire history.
That's right. It's a great mythology that we've created there. What about your critics who say your ideas are going to make divorce easier?
You know, I think actually, I can't imagine divorce being easy for anyone. And I think it, in ways in the beginning, makes it harder because what you're asking yourself to do is to really take responsibility for what's happened and to look at the whole situation in a much bigger, more whole way. And you have to drop into the grief.
Yes.
To do that. And so I don't think that there's any way to get through a divorce without pain and without loss, but I do think there's a way to get through a divorce with some healing.
Okay, we're going to take a very short break and be right back after this. My second guest today has been Barbara Penningroth, and we've been talking about divorce. How do you find happiness after divorce? Write a book about it?
Actually, we couldn't write that book for a year because we were in too much grief. But it has been part of the healing process too, really looking at how do you take a situation that's essentially tragic, and still is, and make something of it that has some meaning in your life. The way you end a relationship is going to have a profound impact on the rest of your life and the relationships that come subsequently to that. And do you find happiness? I think you can.
Okay, Barbara, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing that with us. The book is A Healing Divorce, and you've been watching Off the Page. My name is Leslie Choice, and I'll see you again next time.